just start here. So again, we're going to talk about the Hopp Memorial Scholarship, and we'll just start here. So, all right, so start over again. So here are the application materials that you guys are going to want to be putting together as part of this scholarship. So there's a resume piece, and we'll talk about that because it's going to be a little bit different than a resume that you would normally use for like a job or an internship application. Your first essay is going to be an insights and analysis essay. Your second is about your industry engagement. Your third is about your passion, interest, and then your fourth is about your career plans. So we will, again, we're going to go through each piece of this. We're going to look at what the actual application asks for, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you might approach answering a question like this. So to start off, we're going to start with the essay pieces, and then we'll talk about the resume pieces at the end. So first part for this scholarship application, the first prompt is identify the 3 marketers who, in your opinion, have created or are currently airing and running a body of campaign work based on innovative integrated brand strategies that enhance user experience, deepen consumer engagement, involve the full spectrum of marketing communications today with multi-channel and integrated executions, and identify what you believe is the key marketing challenge for each of the brands and why you believe each of the campaigns you've selected succeeded in meeting that key challenge. So that's a lot, right? There's only 250 words, but you have a lot of information, a lot of stuff in that prompt. So how do you approach that? Right. So a couple of things to think about when you start thinking about what you might want to pick. I think it's really important to remember you want to pick something that's interesting to you, right? So if you pick a series of ads that maybe have all the same theme or something that you're passionate or interested in, I think it's going to be a lot easier for you to pick that apart and kind of do the analysis of this. So, if you can't think of something off the top of your head, obviously you're going to want to go out and do some research. The committee here, they want to see your passion and your interest in the field, but they also want to see your ability to analyze projects, right? So this is probably the most academic piece of this application document, right? So this is going to be what you're going to draw on your academic and classroom knowledge about what makes the campaign good, how you're going to analyze that campaign, talk about how you've conducted research and show that you have both opinions about work and an academic understanding of that work, right? So this is kind of the place where the other pieces you're going to be talking a lot about your own experiences and your interests. This is actually kind of that piece where you're going to be talking about a campaign and why you think it's what was their key challenge and how have they overcome it. I look in reviewing past applicants, some people like to pick, again, like I said before, one theme and kind of build around that. Body positivity, or they want to talk about ads for cars in the for regular cars in the age of electric vehicles or something like that, right? So you can kind of pick something like that, or you can pick 3 different ones. In some ways, if you pick kind of this 3 similar ones, then you have a little bit more time to talk about them. Because if you say, this is, I think, the challenge, and this is how I think these 3 brands are doing that well, right? That gives you just a little bit more space. So again, you want to be thinking about what's innovative, what are they doing that you like or is newsworthy. And again, picking something that is meaningful to you can be really helpful as you, again, want to show your passion and your interest. So some of the places to look for this kind of information, if you don't have something off the top of your head, because I don't know if you guys are like me, I'm not watching a lot of TV these days. So my advertising comes in a lot of different places. So you want to make sure that you can kind of do some research and find maybe some campaigns that you hadn't heard of, right? Or some campaigns that are doing some cool things that maybe are just not at the top of your mind. So some good places to search, obviously. So, Ad Age and Adweek. Looking at LinkedIn, people, are winning awards and things like that for their work. You could look at the list of people who won awards at the Cannes Lion International Festival of Creativity this year. You could, if you've talked about something in an advertising course, of course, that would be a great thing that you could pull in, and you probably have a little bit more context. Or then also you can always look at Google. So I just dropped a link in here. This is the love the work. It's for the Cannes Lion Festival from last summer. So it has just some clips of the people who are nominated and some of the work they were doing. So again, just an interesting, good place to be thinking about if you're thinking about where do I start this research. So that's kind of the approach to that. Again, this is probably the most academic piece. So this is going to be the most like probably something you've done in class or that you've been talking about in some of the classes that you've been doing. Or if you're in AAF or something like that, this is probably some stuff that you've touched on in the past. If you have questions, just unmute yourself and let me know. If not, we'll kind of move forward through these pieces and then we can also save time for questions and answers at the end. But I'll pause there for a second and see if there are any other questions. All right, so no questions to this piece. And then, so the next piece of this application. So this is industry engagement, right? Provide a brief description of your internships, work experience, or other examples of your personal interest in integrated communications and the role they've played in your decision to pursue a career in advertising, right? So now we're starting to talk more about you personally, your background, experiences, and interest in the industry. So the way I would approach this, brainstorm a list of everything you've done, right? This can be personal projects, ads that resonated with you, student organization involvement, class projects, works, internship, freelance work, part-time jobs, right? You want to think about not just listing off these things, right? So again, here's a list of the things to include, academic projects, all those things I talked about. It's not just enough to list off all of these things. You want to tell a story, right? You guys are storytellers. That's what advertising is. What's the story about how all these things fit together for you to want to pursue a career in the advertising industry, right? What can you say about all the pieces that you have kind of put together, and how does that inform your interest in the field and the industry, right? I think it's important to know, right? We know that not everybody's going to have a ton of internship experience or those things, and that's okay. So you just want to make sure you're thinking about everything, right? Like I said, class projects can be really great if you're serving as the social media coordinator for your fraternity or sorority, or you're working for ASMSU, or even have a part-time job where you're working on creating, marketing collateral for events and things like that. All of that stuff can be really valuable, right? So you want to think about what you do have and not what you don't have. So I would be kind of putting a huge list together. Think about everything, right? This is where if you have your resume put together already, this is going to be a lot easier, right? Because it's easier to pull in some of this stuff, but there's stuff here that you might not have on your resume that you're still going to want to pull in. And again, the goal of this is to pull all of this stuff together so that it tells kind of a story. And again, we're talking about a short story, right? Because you don't have a ton of words here in your word limit, but you want to talk about how everything you've done has kind of informed your interest and show again that you're passionate about working in this field and interested in working in this field and interested in working in advertising before someone pays you, right? To do that with a full-time job. I think that's one of the things I see with a lot of students just in general is that they haven't been really actively involved, or they can't really think about what they're doing outside of just taking classes. And they're just waiting to say, well, I'm going to get experience at my first job. But that's probably, for something like this, for a scholarship like this, that's probably not going to be quite enough, right, to get you there. So the more that you can look at your whole experience and, in college particularly, but if there was something back in high school or something before that that really informed your decision to say like, oh, I was really interested in marketing, or if you were previously studying psychology or nursing or something like that and decided to go into advertising, like why? Like tell us, pull all that stuff together to show somebody kind of what it is you're thinking and how you've thought about really going into this, and you're not just kind of falling into this field, right? So questions about that one. And we're going to talk through some more like do's and don'ts and some strategies here. So I want to kind of go through this briefly, want to see if you guys have questions. And then again, we'll save some more generalities for after we go through each of these prompts.
So you said like don't list things. So would you say focus kind of more on one to tell that story, or tell like two or three?
I would say so put it in a narrative format, right? So if that means, I've always been interested from my experience here, here, and here, right? They're going to have your resume, right? So they're going to see a lot of the stuff that you've done. So I would say because you're limited to a 250 word count, yeah, pick the things that you think would tell the best, that would show the best story and that you could put together. And again, you don't have to talk about everything, but you could include things in more of a one list, right? Like from my experience from here to here to here, this is all I've done and really has informed my interest. In particular, I want to focus on this one story kind of thing. So I think that would be a good approach to answering that question. All right. Okay, so now we'll move on. So the next piece is your passion description, right? All of these are going to be talking about your passion, right? You want to demonstrate your interest in and kind of commitment to the industry. This one provides 3 to 5 short examples that demonstrate your passion for and commitment to pursuing a career in advertising, right? So this might be, again, like, did you change your major and how does that help? Or did you decide to get involved in XYZ? Did you offer to do something in your fraternity or sorority or student organization that's not related? Or, did you call up somebody and cold call them to get an internship, or, whatever it is? Are you signing up for 427, or are you signing up for the street team, or, being in an advertising competition, right? Like, this is going to draw back on also your experiences, but how do you show that you're committed to this and that this isn't just something that you're like, when after I graduate, maybe I go into advertising and maybe I don't know. So they really want to see kind of a focus on, how can you show us that that this is what you want to do and that you've taken some strides again, instead of just kind of passively going through your college experience, to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success, right? And so kind of that's, I think, a little bit, self-explanatory, and, you can definitely think about, again, looking back at your resume, thinking back through that brainstorm list that you used for your last, for your other experiences, that kind of can put some other things here. This can be shorter, right? This doesn't have to necessarily be quite as much as a story as I would do for the previous one. You can have like 3, 80-word things if you wanted to show kind of the things that you're doing, to put those materials together. I think that's what I've seen from the examples that I've seen of students who won this award. These ones were a little bit more short and focused, where the previous ones were a little more of a narrative of their experience. Questions about that one?
So in the description, it says like 3 to 5 short examples. Would this include like having an actual like campaign to show, or like a piece or like a project to show and describing it, or is it just like strictly words?
I haven't seen anyone pull in their actual like an advertising campaign or something like that. So typically I think it's been more about shorter, smaller things, as part of that. Although we can talk about, having a campaign or something, but I think it's not for you to discuss your work, but more to discuss your interest and how did you approach the things that you were doing, right? Like, why did you develop, why did you take this thing to develop a campaign? Why did you join this group? Why did you do that? As opposed to the work, talking about the work, it's more about your experience of doing these things and how that shows your interest in advertising.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so then your last one, and this one's a little interesting, career plan description, right? So you did kind of talk a little bit about your interest in those things in the past, but this one has a very unique, I guess, prompt for this title. So describe any coursework taken outside of your advertising major requirement that's been meaningful to you in your pursuit of a career in marketing communications. Why was this coursework meaningful to you with regard to your career aspirations? And then the second prompt, what are the 3 most important criteria that will guide you in selecting a company to work for upon your graduation from Michigan State University? So here, right, this is great. You get to talk about your passion for advertising again, what you want to do in your career. What are you aiming to kind of achieve? And then, what are some of the things outside of advertising that you've done here that have kind of made you think a little bit? And so kind of to approach that, I was thinking of a list of courses that might, and again, you can use anything, but just for examples, thinking of some courses that may have maybe a good fit in terms of how they might have impacted the way you think about advertising. So first, right, make sure that these aren't courses that you've had to take as part of your curriculum. And not just think about advertising courses, but there's that whole list. So if you're not sure what you've had to take for the curriculum, just look that up on the registrar's page just to make sure that you're not that you're following the prompt and not saying oh, this is the course, but the course that I already had to take. Some good ones, right? If you think about what are some of the pieces that you're going to need to do in order to be successful in the industry. And so I was thinking off the top of my head, right, like a statistics course, so you're understanding numbers and metrics and those kinds of things might be useful. Any, PR courses, any sort of writing or English courses, potentially, even if that's creative writing, professional writing, something outside of the college. Sociology, right, that informs society and how we all interact with each other. Psychology is, focusing on how individuals operate and how they might react to things. History, right, that might be a good thing to think about, just because of how does, historically, how have things been impacted? Have we seen any big changes, right? So something that focuses on history. Or identity and diversity, right? If those are things that are interesting to you, how a class in women or gender studies or something like that, how could that inform, your interest in advertising or what you would want to do or pursue as part of that career? And then, potentially something like art or art history. Now, this is by no means a comprehensive list, just literally off the top of my head, thinking of some of the things that might be places that you could find some synergy between those things and advertising, and maybe make some good connections. I know I had I saw in the past, I think, a student who was had studied nursing or psychology, right? So they had talked a little bit about how they made that change and what they learned from those courses that would apply to this kind of work. And then for the second piece, I think it's important to understand, kind of for you to think about what's important to you in your, I would say in your career, but in your work environment, right? And we talk about this a lot in career services, but we maybe don't talk about it anywhere else. So as you're thinking about what's important to you, as you start thinking about an agency, a couple things to think about, right? First, what kind of environment do you want to be in terms of the size of that environment and the scope of work that they do, right? So thinking about a small agency or a mid-sized agency where maybe you're doing a little bit more versus a large agency where you might only be working on one account and all you do is social for Chevy or trucks, right? Or something like that. Thinking about, well, what is a good environment for me? Potentially, something you could draw on. You could also think about your work values. So what's important to you in an environment as you think about working, right? So is that recognition? Is that work-life balance? Is that competition? Is that achievement? Is that power? What are the things that are important to you in terms of your work values that you'll want to see represented in an organization, right? And if you have questions about work values, we have, a bunch of information in the office, so feel free to pop back in and we can talk more about what those work values are and how do you identify them and how might you use those to do some research on an employer, right? Again, thinking about things like company culture, right? Are you interested in working for an organization that is working to reduce their carbon footprint, or they pick clients based on X, Y, or Z, right? If they're doing something that's important to you, or they have a really strong culture of, honoring their employees and, self-care or whatever it is, right? You want to know what that culture is like at the company. So that could be something potentially that would be interesting to think about as you think about what's a good work environment for you. the mission and the vision of the organization, right? How do those things align with the things that are important to you and with your work values? Those can be some important things to think about when you're thinking about an agency, right? And then like, what is potentially, if this is important to you, like corporate social responsibility, what kind of outreach are they doing? Again, are they trying to limit their environmental impact? Are they, committed to giving back to people? So you can really think about all of these things and think about what based on those kinds of things might be important to you and better to pull on than potentially saying like, oh, I just want to work for Ogilvy because it's the best agency in the world and that's like what I'm doing, right? So thinking a little bit more about that, not only for this application, to be honest, but as you start thinking about careers and internship opportunities, those can be really important pieces to help you figure out, is this place going to be a good fit, or am I going to show up here and then hate it for, the next year of my life? But thinking about, I think that's how I would approach that. Thinking about some of those things will give you kind of a little bit more meat to that answer than just, I want to work for this kind of place, right? So thinking about those can help you figure out what is actually important to you and what would you actually look at, as opposed to trying to think about like, what do I think they want me to say as I'm trying to answer this question? So those are the pieces outside of the resume. Before we move on to some general do's and don'ts, other questions?
This is just a minor little thing, like the last description for the career plans description. I know the bottom it said like 250 words max. Was that it's for each of them, correct?
I think it's just for all of it together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I
would ask too, because I'm just reading what I was provided. So I'm assuming that's my take on it, but I would reach out to, you can reach out to like Lacey or somebody else on the, who helps coordinate that to see if I am correct on that, but it is not very long. Everything I saw was not super long. I think that's for both of them. Good question. All right, just some general advice for this stuff, right? Start well in advance of the application deadline, right? If you wait till the last minute to write your scholarship essay, the quality is going to suffer, right? I run a similar program out of career services for internships, and it's very clear when someone has like submitted like something that they wrote like 25 minutes before the deadline, and then they were like the last person to submit, right? So make sure that you have enough time for planning, because I think the more you plan on the front end and you start thinking about these prompts and how you might answer them and pulling all of your experiences together and thinking about how they could create a cohesive story, you're going to have a better and stronger application, right? So make sure you're really starting at, well in advance. Also, you want to know your audience, right? So again, this is going to be people who are working in academia, and others who are kind of looking, what are they looking for potentially? Start thinking a little bit about that. Not that you want to like tailor or be inauthentic to cater to them, but sometimes it's important to think about like, what do I think this committee what is important to them? And some of that you can see just by the prompts that they've asked, right? Thinking about what's important to them and how they talk about things can help inform how you write experiences so they align with kind of what they're thinking. Again, follow the instructions and answer the prompts. Like that sounds, like, yes, duh, Randy, of course, but you'd be surprised at how many times you look at something and someone has not followed the instructions, right? They've gone 3 pages over because they have so much to say. Well, but nobody else went, 3 pages over. They went 250 words like they were supposed to. So, think about that and make sure that you're following those instructions. Make sure you go back. And once you've created your answers, that you relook at the prompts and say, like, did I answer the questions here? I know that sounds silly, but we see it a lot. Like I partially answered the question, or I forgot about this one, or, oh, I got so excited about the career one that I answered the bottom part, but I forgot to really talk about the top part, right? So making sure that you're answering all of those prompts and that you've kind of got all of those pieces together. Choose things you're passionate about, right? If there's a campaign you really loved, a class you really loved, something that insight you got out of a class that you took that maybe was completely unique, show those things, right? The more you can show, again, your passion and your interest and your commitment and your drive to really go through and succeed in this industry, you're just going to have a more compelling application, right? But of course, you also want to be honest, right? You don't want to be like, well, I could kind of fudge this a little bit, or I think this is what they want to hear, so I want to make sure that I'm talking about that. You know, people will find out, right? If they're like, well, she didn't have this internship or she never did this experience. So you really don't want to, you know, take your friend's experience because it sounds better, or, you know, kind of fudge that a little so that it sounds more compelling. Make sure that you are being honest. Again, using real life examples. Another thing I see sometimes is people are like, well, I would, in general, this would be important to me, or I think I would act this way. But you really want to say, like, I did when I took this course, or when I did this internship, or when I took this class project, right? If the more you can use your real life examples in these prompts, the better off you're going to be than just speaking in kind of generalities. Again, focus on what you have and not what you don't have, right? So if you're writing this, you don't want to say like, well, I know other applicants probably have more internship experience than me, or they've been in an advertising major longer, or whatever, right? You know, it's in your mind, you're probably thinking that, right? Because you think about scholarship applications or job applications or internship applications. Every student I talk to is like, well, I don't have this. And maybe you don't, but like, don't tell that to the committee. Like, that's not what you want them to be focusing on, right? You want to be like, oh, well, here's the thing, like, here's all this great stuff that I do have, and here's why I'd be a great candidate, and here's why I have this, and here's what I've thought about here, and here's how I'm making up for maybe if I don't think I have a lot of experience that's internship related, but I do have this volunteer experience or this, right? So focus on what you have and not what you don't, right? You never want to paint the picture for a committee to be like, well, she's right, doesn't have the experience, so Randy's out of the pile, right? So focus on what you do have and not what you don't. And then of course, like proofread, right? Proofread, get help, have other people look at it. You know, again, as we start thinking about stuff, especially stuff we're really excited or passionate about, like it's very easy to kind of go off track or like kind of lose the thread a little bit. So making sure that other people are taking a look and saying like, does this make sense to you? Do you know what I'm trying to say? Again, will just help make sure that you're telling the story that you want to tell, and that someone who isn't you can understand what you're trying to convey to them. Some general don'ts, you know, don't utilize like inspirational phrases or like general platitudes, right? Like I know we see quotes all the time, but just, you don't have that much time. You only have 250 words, you know, don't start with a quote, right? Like to be like, you know, Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world or whatever. And then like kind of go from there. Like, I just don't know that again, it's a little disingenuous. I don't think you need to do that. Same with things like, you know, just saying like, I will, you know, good things come to those who wait, or, you know, stuff like that. Again, as much as you can keep that stuff out of what you're trying to say, like really kind of get the overly generic stuff out of there. Even if there is a thought that you're like something you heard that you're like, that really did resonate with me. You don't necessarily need to pop the quote into your essay here. You know, again, don't pick anything that's overly controversial, right? So we always say like politics, religion, those kinds of things, potentially like you want to leave that stuff out, because again, you don't know who your audience is going to be who's reading this. And so, you know, I think there's sometimes, especially in advertising and work that I see with students, there's like a desire to go really controversial, right? Like I'm going to go and talk about this thing because it's really going to grab attention. But in something like this, I apologize, my dog is wanting his dinner. But I would say kind of refrain from something that's overly controversial or something that potentially will raise people's emotions in the way you're not looking to do, right? So you want to just be careful as you're thinking about topics. Again, when you're thinking about your writing, don't use kind of superfluous words or what I like to call like thesaurus speak, right? So what I think about this is, again, you'll have 250 words. So you want to take out every spare word that you can to make sure that you can get your point across, but that you are not putting in filler words or extra words. And I think one of the things I see again a lot with students, not just with scholarship applications, but with kind of all sorts of job related things, is the willingness or the wanting to feel like I think my language is too simple. I want to make it sound smarter or better, more advanced. And I see, that's where I see this, like this source speak coming in, right? Like it's very clear. People are like right clicking through and being like, oh, that word sounds, that's a bigger, better word, but usually it doesn't quite fit. And again, it's kind of like pulls away. So if you want to talk about something and your interest and your excitement, smaller words, the smallest words you can use, the better, right? Clear, concise, simple words. That's always going to be better than right clicking and adding in a bunch of those, bigger, fancier words. Again, don't speak in kind of overly dramatic tones, like I will die if I don't get this scholarship or something like that. Again, probably not true. And then just don't be too casual, right? So you're writing this, you want to make sure that you aren't taking kind of an overly familiar or too casual tone in the way that you're speaking, that again, you're using full sentences and all of that stuff. That sounds silly, but again, things I have seen along the way. So making sure that kind of strike the right tone, that this is a professional opportunity. And you want to speak in a professional tone, right? Again, these people, want to see that you have a sense of professionalism. All right, so that is all my general do's and don'ts for writing the application essay pieces. What questions do you have there? Or we can kind of talk about resume stuff. All right, we don't have any. Okay, so resumes, right? You're gonna have to submit your resume as part of this. I will say this, I think scholarship applications, study abroad applications, there are certain places where what you'll hear from us every single day from the Career Center, which is like one page, doesn't really apply, right? So resumes for scholarship applications don't need to be formatted in the exact same way that you would format something for a job or an internship. So I would say you want to be able to include, and you can include more information than you can include on a typical resume. So if you have a lot of experience and you're kind of, in this situation where you are like, I don't know what to take off my resume, I have so much, like it already is 2 pages long. That could be okay for something like this, right? You want to be comprehensive. You want to show like all of your activity and involvement, and you don't want to necessarily knock things out just to keep it to a short page, right? So thinking about, especially as you're thinking about a scholarship application, right? Of course, you want your education and your experience and the skills that you have, but other things become really important too, right? Projects, maybe coursework or academic projects, service projects that are related, extracurricular activities, clubs and organizations, especially if you've held like an active role or done something that's related. Research project that you maybe worked on, TAing for a class, right? All of that stuff that you might not necessarily focus on a lot, depending on what you're trying to do in your resume, or given that one page, you can definitely put more of that information into a scholarship application. Now, the caveat to that is if you're applying for another scholarship and they say we want a 1-page resume, right? You always want to follow their instructions. So this is just general advice. But make sure that you're reading through the instructions, because if they're like, we want you to have 1 page, then you have to have 1 page. But in general, a lot of academic kind of things, people can definitely spend more time. It's more common to have longer resumes in academia, and it's longer to people to often want to see more information than less information on something like a scholarship application. So again, just general things about resume format to be thinking about. Typically, we say education first, experience section or second, affiliation, skills, all of that stuff after, kind of fall after that experience. But again, when you think about format, the biggest thing to be thinking about is it still easy to read, right? You don't want to squish everything into size 8 font or cut 2 columns and make things really hard for people to find important information. And most people, when they're looking at a resume, are trying to pick out dates, locations, titles, right? And so you want to make sure that those things are easy to read. So this is just a sample format for a resume. Again, you don't have to use this format, but I wanted to just point out it's easy to pick out important information here. So something like this is something that you may want to do. We have other, example resumes on the Career Services website for the college. So there's a bunch of examples there. You can see a lot of examples online too, but there's also a lot of bad examples online. So be careful as you start thinking about that. And again, we'll talk some more do's and don'ts in a minute. things to be thinking about, right? Keywords and action verbs. Again, in many ways, writing a resume for a scholarship application is no different than writing a resume for something else, except for you can include more information. But you want to look for keywords and you want to look for action verbs, right? Again, you want to show what you've done. You don't want to just tell about something. So when we think about how to format the content of your resume, we always talk about who. And what that means is, what did you do? And either how did you do it, right? Like, what were the tools, the resources, the program, the technology, or what was the purpose of what you were doing, right? Like, what were you trying to accomplish with the work that you were doing? Or sometimes what was the actual outcome, right? We had an increase in impressions. We won the competition. We did, right? So like, you can have some outcomes, but I know in a lot of places, right, you don't necessarily have those metrics because either you were just doing a summer internship and you don't have all the final data, or you were just working on a class project and that didn't have outcome data like that. So again, if you can talk about what the goal is of what you were doing, that can be just as important. You want to think about, again, as you think about formatting, how can you make sure that this is easy to read, right? So bold and italics can really help differentiate between sections, can add visual interest, make it easy for someone to pick things out as they're reading through your resume. And again, people want to have like a quick view, and they want to be able to find things. If people can't read your resume or they can't find important things, they're probably not going to take the time to look at it. So make sure that it's easy to pick those things out. Again, same with underline. You can use that to differentiate within or between sections, but you want to use that a little bit more sparingly. Other things to think about, colors are fine, right? This is a creative industry. You can use color, but make sure that your color choice wouldn't be vital to the understanding of your resume, right? So if you think about it, probably most people just have a black and white printer. So probably going to print things in black and white. So make sure when it prints that the contrast is high enough that you can see things. You really want to make sure that you can use some color, but that it doesn't make it too hard to read in black and white. As you think about how do you format your sections, again, no one really likes to read anymore. So bullet points are always preferential to like a narrative format. So writing out, while I was here, I was responsible for doing this, blah, 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 right? So like that's not really a strong way to write a resume. One, you never want to use I, me, or my in your resume document, but if you have a bullet point, right, that allows people, again, bam, 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 like I created, I did, I accomplished, I this, right? You really want to start with those bullets to quickly highlight your skills and accomplishments. And we say one skill, accomplishment, task, outcome per bullet point, right? So think about it that way. You don't want to have multiple things running together. And then you want to be consistent, right? So you want to make sure that all of your application of color or underline or bold or font or type of looking bullet, all of those things are consistent across all of your sections, right? So it's even little things. If you say October and you write out October all the way, when you go to, for one of your dates and your next date, make sure if it's August that you're writing August all the way out and not using an abbreviation, right? It's little things like that, but that's the stuff, again, kind of shows some attention to detail that I think is really important. And it will just give you a better looking and an easier to read document. You want to avoid things, right? Photos, religious or political affiliations, things like your social security number, although for some applications you might need some of that, but not on your resume, or any really like overly personal information. Again, other things like uncommon section headings, right? Like you want to say like education, work experience, technical skills, as opposed to like where I've made an impact, right? Like I don't know what that means. So again, just be straightforward. It's again, the easier and more straightforward you are, you don't want to leave any questions for someone. They're not going to probably call you and ask you to be like, what does this mean? Like if they don't understand it right away, like, that's just putting, yourself at a disadvantage. Again, making sure you define or avoid abbreviations and acronyms, right? Probably most people know what VIM magazine is at Michigan State, but if you just said, well, I'm at VIM, blah, 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 right? Like, or something like that, you really want to just write things out, at least let somebody know what this is. Don't think that they have the same knowledge as you, because they may not. And so those are kind of the general do's and don'ts of resumes. Again, think about, you can put more information. One of the things I like to talk about is, think about a resume for a scholarship application more like a LinkedIn profile. I don't know if you guys have LinkedIn profiles, but you have so much more space to put information, right? You're not really limited to such a short amount of space. So this is where you can put a little bit more information. You can go a little bit more into depth about what you've done. Again, you want to keep it relevant. You don't want to put everything in. You don't want to put in stuff from high school. You don't want to put in stuff that just doesn't really make sense here. Like if you used to be a nursing major, you don't have to put in all your, like if you did clinical experience or something like that, that stuff doesn't have to go here because again, it's not super related. But if you were on the, nursing is, student organization and you were the social media chair, right? That might be something that you'd want to put. So as you think about what to include and what not, you also still do want to think about, what is relevant. Because again, you don't just want to put in more information just to have a longer resume. Not necessary. I think you can have a one-page resume that has a really strong, that will make you a strong applicant. So again, it's kind of a balance between like how much experience do you have versus not adding too much or embellishing too much just to get over that one page. Okay, so with that, just some quick resources. So as you do this, right, don't do this alone. The MSU Writing Center, if you've never been there, they're a great resource. They have consultants that will come in, they work on this stuff all of the time. They would definitely help you make sure that your ideas are being clearly explained, they're making sense. You could bring the prompts in, bring in what you're working on, bring in your resume, and they can help you kind of make sure all the pieces kind of fit together, or they may even say, hey, like this might be a good experience to talk about, or why haven't you talked about this? So definitely take advantage of them. Take advantage of us in the Career Center, right? So we have drop-in advising every day in person in room 181 of the building, 10 to 3, Monday through Friday. If you do come in for assistance with your resume for a scholarship application, let them know that, right? Because you'll probably, if you don't and you have a 2-page resume, they'll be like, oh, you need a 1-page resume, right? But if you can talk about that this is for a scholarship application, then again, that can give you a little bit of, some different advice. You can also meet with me. So I have both in-person and virtual meetings. Those are all, my schedule is available in Handshake. So if you guys aren't using that, it's our career management system. It's where jobs postings are, events, career fairs, and also the link to our advising. So if you just go in there, there's a button that says Career Center and then a button that says schedule an appointment with your advisor. You can search for me, ComArtsci Randy, that's my name in there. And schedule a meeting with me. Happy to look over all of this stuff with you. Again, kind of same advice there. If you're going to come in to meet with me, bring in the prompts, bring in your resume, bring in what you have so far, and then we can kind of talk about approaches and does this make sense, and maybe some other things that you'd want to include. Again, also, these are not the only resources, right? There are tons of people that want you to succeed and will be happy to help you with this stuff, right? So if there are faculty members that you really have had a good relationship with, or they were really good class, or you really like their opinion, have them take a look. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just an advertising faculty member. It can be anybody that, is working and talking about things, and who you think could be able to help you think, a little bit more about what you're doing. But definitely make sure that you're taking advantage of your resources. You're having other people read this stuff to make sure, again, that you're putting across the strongest case, that you possibly can for this application or any scholarship application that you're going to be doing in now or in the future. So that's me talking at you for 45 minutes. Any other questions or anything that you feel like I haven't covered that you still want to talk about?
I had a question about the resume. You said, so would you say most of them are 2-paged for this?
I would say I didn't see all the applicants, right? So I can't tell you that. I would say, again, I would just say don't worry too much about how long it is. But if you have experience that goes on to 2 pages, that's okay in a case like this. If you don't, again, I think, you can have a very strong resume that's really to the point on just 1 page.
And you kind of talked about, you mentioned like coursework on the resume. Say like you took extra classes not related, like say coding classes or like website design classes that kind of can help with advertising. Would you say to like add that to it, or no?
Yeah, I think you could definitely add, again, it always depends on what your specific experience is. So in some ways it's hard to say, oh, put all this information, because I might say something different depending on your experience. But if that's some of that stuff, especially for something like this, where they're asking you for other experiences that might have influenced your advertising, I think you could definitely put that stuff in. Or if you're a student who's newer to the major, right, who doesn't have a lot of that, sometimes putting those classes can go well, but for, especially for this prompt, potentially you could write about those in that specific prompt that wants to talk about classes that you've taken. So it really does depend on your specific resume. So I think if you have really specific questions for any of you, I think you would benefit from coming in and talking to someone one-on-one to make sure that the advice that you're getting is the best advice for your particular situation. Because like I said, that can change for every student depending on their past experience, where they kind of are now, and where they're headed.
I had like 2 more questions.
Yeah,
Sorry. So I saw the scholarship is for advertising majors. Would you say there's like a preference for like management or creative?
I wouldn't say that there's a preference, right? Again, I think it's all about how can you talk about your passion and experience, right? I think you would probably just see in the numbers game more advertising management. That's just because that's a bigger program, not because it's more preferred for this application.
Mm-hmm. And then for like, saw the video for like the previous winners, are there any like key points as to what made them stand out or anything about them?
I think it was just that they were all, very thoughtful. They had really thought about what they're interested in doing. They have a good story, right, about how they ended up where they are. They have a good sense of direction of where they're kind of going. And I think that clarity is helpful, right? That's going to be the thing that, again, shows this person is serious, and this person is going to, again, this person, they developed this scholarship based on like having a career in advertising, because someone encouraged them to have a career in advertising. So I think as long as you can show that, that's the important thing. I think where students falter sometimes is they just don't really have a clear sense of where they want to go or what they want to do, or how any of what they're doing right now is leading them in that direction. So that's, I think, more important than anything else.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming and chatting. I did record this presentation, so I will send it over to everyone who's here, and then I will also send it over to Lacey and the rest of everybody who organized this, so that they can share it with other people. And then again, take advantage, please come in. I'm happy to chat more if you have specific questions. If you're working through this again and you're like, what did she say? I cannot remember. Just let me know. I'm happy to help. All right. Well, thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.